Okay. The last part of the session is to plan homework. And if you've managed your time effectively as a group leader, which is something you're really going to have to work at, then you'll have some time to complete this part of the exercise. And this is really one of the most important parts of the session, because the parents don't plan and think through how to get these strategies home and use them. The likelihood of them actually applying them is pretty limited. So what I'm going to ask you to do is I'll ask you to make sure you've got a homework sheet and a pencil again. And I'm going to ask you to write down a couple of situations where you could practice. I'm going to remind you that you shouldn't expect an immediate response from your kids. This is just a chance to practice. Ask you to think about where you could post that homework sheet so it would be a good reminder to you, where you'll see it during the week. Get you to think a little bit about lots of opportunities to practice and to check those off, to self-monitor. Again, goal setting, public posting, and self-monitoring are really good skill-building strategies and transfer strategies. For those of you whose partners aren't here, I'll ask you to think a little bit about, as a group, about how to share what you've been working on tonight with partners who may not be here, and talk about that. And we'll talk about that in each session. And then I'm going to ask you to think about what's the first chance that you'll get to practice these strategies. So for parents whose kids are in the kids group, it'll be on the way home, the transition out of the kids group. And again, the sooner parents actually apply these strategies with their kids, the more likely they're going to generalize. We usually ask about missing members, somebody who's not here tonight, that if anybody knows them or might be able to get in contact with them and tell them we missed them, and see if there's anything we can do to encourage them to come back out. And then we'll close the session. And we always try to close COPE sessions right on time at 9 o'clock. Okay, so this is what the homework sheet would look like. It's in your manual on the disc, and so if you want to print that out, you can do that later. So here we go. Okay, does everyone have a homework sheet? Great. Got homework sheets and pens? You've got your pencils? Okay. What I want you to do is take your pencils, and each of you write down 2 or 3 situations where you could practice attending strategies at your house this week. Maybe it'll be homework, like Greg and I did. Maybe it'll be bedtime. Maybe it'll be riding in the car. So take a moment and just write down some situations right now where you can practice. And as a leader, go around and make sure that people are actually writing them down. There's some people who like to keep their homework sheets pristine and untouched, and so you want to really encourage them to actively write it down. Now, remember that this is just a chance for you to practice. So don't expect that if you're having trouble at the dinner table or getting dressed and ready for school in the morning is a difficult time, this isn't going to turn things around. This is just a chance for you to practice. So kids take time to change, so don't expect too much. Now, where could you put this sheet so you'll see it and it'll be a good reminder to you? Refrigerator? Okay. Any other suggestions? Okay, on your desk? Oh, on the mirror? Okay. Family bulletin board? Okay. A lot of parents find that their kids will ask a little bit about this, and it sets the occasion for some discussion. I'm trying this week to remember to tell you, all the nice things that I see you doing, because you do a lot of things, and sometimes I just miss those as a parent. So sometimes those conversations are good. Now, I want you to try and use these strategies as many times as you can, and every time you do, check it off. So if you go home tonight and you sit down at the dinner table and you practice some attending strategies, give it a check. Maybe after dinner you do homework and show some interest in that, give it a check. Maybe at bedtime, in that transition for getting ready to bed, practice some attending strategies, check it off. So try to practice as many times as you can and check it off every opportunity that you get. Bring this back next week and we'll take a look at those. Now, I know some of you are here and your partners aren't able to be with us. So any ideas about how you could share the strategies that we've been talking about this evening with them? Any thoughts about that? Okay, sit down and take a look at the homework sheet and use that as an occasion to talk about it. Other ideas? Okay, download it and email it to them. Okay, all right, all right. No, unfortunately not. Just set a time that you could sit down with your partner and turn off the TV, easy to do, football season's over, and just talk about it. Okay, so, and let me add a role as a leader. This is something we want parents to think about. And generally, I think our experience has been that when dads aren't involved, they're still involved. Most of them are going to make an effort to find out what's going on. Most will be supportive. Every once in a while you hear about situations where they're not. But by and large, even though they're not actively participating, they tend to be supportive. But moms and parents who are here without their partners often recognize that this is something you need to think about, that they need to approach it in a thoughtful way. So we want them to reflect on how to do it. And over the next couple of sessions, we'll ask parents what's worked well and what kind of strategies have they found that make that go well. Now, how many of you have kids in a kids group tonight? Okay, several of you. Is there any way you could use attending strategies on the way home tonight? Thoughts about how to do that? I should ask some good questions, what they were working on tonight, what they learned. What kinds of things could you do? Okay, they'll probably have some little pictures of the skill they were working on tonight, so take a look at that and comment on it. That's a neat little picture you drew. Those guys looks like they're taking turns there.
Talk about the sunset.
Okay, talk about lovely sunset.
Direction the sun is in, what colors are in the sky.
Okay.
And always comes down to why.
Okay, so have a little existential conversation with them.
I answer the questions, and often I don't know.
Okay, so use it as an opportunity to show interest in kids and their artwork and what they're doing in the kids group, or just generally about the lovely time of the year that it is and the beautiful sunsets that you have here in Miami. Okay, and those of you whose kids aren't in the kids group, what's the first chance that you get to use these strategies? Okay, kids still up? Yeah, use them when you get home. Other ideas? Okay, first thing in the morning when kids are getting ready for school. It's great, you guys are dressed and ready for school. That's terrific. You got your bag and you've got your books. Terrific, way to go. Okay, now somebody's missing here tonight. Who is not here? Luther. Okay. Does anyone know Luther? Or? Okay. Could you, if you see him, let him know that we missed him, and actually we've got a homework planning sheet here that has the stuff that we've been working on, and maybe you could, if you see him, share that with him, and so he knows what we've been working on. Okay. It's just 9 o'clock, so we'll see you next week at 7 o'clock, same time. And I'm going to go down and let the kids group leaders know that we've finished up for the evening. So we'll see you next week. Okay, we encourage leaders not to hang around at the front of the room after a large group like this, because what's going to happen if you do? Everybody will come up and they'll line up, and they'll have complicated questions. And as soon as they're out on the table, then you're sort of stuck with them. And in a large group, in a community-based program, you don't know these parents well. You don't fully understand the situations that they're talking about. You really shouldn't be in a situation where you're giving advice or providing helpful comments on things. So the best way is just as a leader to leave the room. Kids group leaders have been down there for 2 hours. Kids are tired. They need to get home. Parents need to get home. You need to get home. So the best way to do that is just to walk out the door. If you stand up here, then you'll be here till 11 o'clock, and you'll take home all sorts of stuff that you don't really want to be taking home. Okay, so any questions just briefly about that session? Because what we're going to do in the next part of the afternoon is to take you through another session. Be very similar to the one we just did, but different set of strategies. So any questions before we begin? There are time guidelines in the manual for each session. Yes, you'd give them instructions to write a few situations down, and then you'd give them a minute or two to do that. Depends on, that's all, just to write it down. Because they're just going to write down dinner table, riding in the car, while kids are getting ready for bed. They're just going to, we just mostly want them to think of a situation, make a commitment to it, and write it down.
I have a question about homework. What if they don't bring it back?
Okay, so...
Did we cover that, or at the initial start? Because I know that came first, a review of homework.
What if they haven't brought their homework back? Where there are a couple of things. One is that's not uncommon, obviously. And parents are sometimes not going to remember to bring their sheets back. They're sometimes not going to remember to even do their homework. But if they haven't brought them back, one of the things we try to do is in that first homework review activity at the start of the session, we ask the group to remind parents of the strategy that we're working on. So before they start to report on homework, we bring everybody up to speed. Everybody's on the same page. So for parents who may have forgotten what we did, because parents will sometimes forget what we worked on last time, that brings them up. Sometimes we have in some studies, we have had a homework sheet. We've asked parents, if you did your homework, check it off when you come in. We ask them to check it off. And if you forgot it, or you didn't get a chance to do it, work on it this week and bring it back. So that seems to motivate people to bring it in more reliably. And certainly at the beginning of the homework review, which we'll do in a few minutes, the leader's going to put a lot of emphasis on having brought the homework back and encourage parents to do that. If you as a leader indicate that it's important to bring those homework sheets back, parents are more likely to do it. But sometimes they will forget it. There's a lot of redundancy built into the curriculum of parenting programs, so we worked on rewards and attending today, but that'll come up in every subsequent session. And in the session where we work on planned ignoring, that's a strategy which will come up over and over in subsequent sessions. So in the next session when we do transitional warnings, for example, kids typically argue with transitional warnings, and so we get a chance to go back and talk about, so if they got into a big argument, what would you do? And parents will say, well, we'd ignore it. And so there's a chance, even if parents have completely missed a session, there's a chance to go over most of the content in subsequent sessions. There's a lot of redundancy in parent training. Parents talk about strategies. They think about the rationales. They watch you demonstrate those strategies. They brainstorm about those strategies. They practice those strategies. And you're really almost trying to overlearn these things, and a lot of repetition built into the way that the curriculum is designed. David?
Yeah. Chuck, the role-playing that's being done, I know a lot of the role-playing, at least the role-playing that we did, was done individually, in little breakout sessions. Is any of the role-play ever done kind of for group consumption, or do you leave the videos to kind of cover that end of it? The only role-playing that is done kind of for large group consumption is when you model during the middle of the session. But when parents are practicing, we want to make it as private and as easy as possible. So we pair them up and we spread them out around the room, and typically they're working with the same pairs every session. So we try to make it as easy as possible. But we don't ask a
a couple of parents, for example, to role play in front of the whole group.
Right.
That's really
Yeah,
intimidating.
that's I wanted to just get a handle on that. This follow-up question I have for that is, so I should get closer. The use of the term homework. I know you work with a lot of groups of individuals that maybe don't have good histories in school, and do you guys ever play around with the use of that term or the way you frame the activities, or do you find that it really doesn't matter?
That's an interesting question. From an empirical perspective, I don't know, but I suspect we do have parents who have.
Yeah, that's something I guess. I've worked a lot in Mississippi and Louisiana in some very rural areas, and by and large, I mean, this is more an intuition thing. Anything else is not. It's not based on data, but I've tried to avoid using that kind of terminology,
homework,
which I think sort of reinforces the notion that, hey, I'm here to teach and you're here to learn, which it would not be consistent with what you've been presenting.
Yeah, we emphasize that the purpose of homework is to practice. Sure. But we hadn't thought about a name. So what would you call it? Would be interesting.
Practice.
Practice.
Probably.
Yeah. Chance to practice. Yeah. I think that's an interesting suggestion. Okay. Other questions?
I have one.
Shoot.
I noticed that a lot of the time you were giving the kids instructions to be like the well-behaved kids, which suggests to me that you're trying to get the parents to rehearse positive examples and not negative examples. Should we as group leaders try and limit the amount of negative practicing that goes on in the group and limit that just to the video, or do you want people to rehearse both positive and negative examples?
When parents are practicing, we want them to concentrate on positive examples. And we want the kids that they're practicing with to be well-behaved so that they're successful. You want it to be as easy as possible. They're just trying these strategies out. A lot of parents will be familiar with them, but the idea is to make it as simple and as successful as possible. What parents have a tendency to do, and you noticed when we were modeling, Greg and I told him he needed to behave himself. Parents want to present you with the worst possible evening scenario, the kind of things that their kids do, to see how you'd respond. And you're just working on attending strategies tonight. The kinds of things that parents often confront you with, you're going to want to sit down and plan ahead about them, maybe work out a contract, develop a point system, contemplate the use of timeout. So you're going to consider those problems really require the application of the full repertoire of skills that you're going to teach in a parenting program. And so for the educational goals of the program, you want to keep it simple. You want to keep it as simple as possible. Once we get into planned ignoring, then we'll let the kids who are role-playing fuss a little bit, or argue once, or do something that parents could easily ignore where it would be appropriate. But for lots of the kinds of problems that parents are having and that they'd like to confront you with in the modeling situation, ignoring is only a small part of the repertoire of strategies that you'd need to manage that behavior. So we're trying to keep the level of the problems consistent with the strategies that we're working on. So the first session, we're just working on attending, ignoring in subsequent sessions. So we try to keep it simple. So it's always a little bit of tension. And if parents can't resist, which sometimes they can't, and they just have to do something, you can just stop it and say, let's come back to that in a couple of sessions. So we'll work on some strategies for dealing with this. Or how many of you guys have had this kind of stuff happen around your house? And everybody will raise their hands. We'll say, okay, well, we're going to work on this in the next 2 or 3 sessions, but tonight, let's keep it simple. So sometimes it's going to happen, but as a leader, you just have to work with it as flexibly as you can. But if it gets too complicated, then you need to stop it.
I realized that the people in the room, the parents that are being trained, they might see something and say, well, that's not important. But to hear the rest of the group talk about the fact that, oh, he touched him, oh, that must be important. Sort of a reinforcement for them, and maybe a brand new idea to someone who is there for maladaptive type parenting behaviors.
Okay. That's a really important point, is that oftentimes in modeling, you may add to the strategy. So for example, in attending, one of the things that we do a lot is to repeat back things that kids have said. Dad, I'm working on a little car here. You had a little car there. And it's a really effective listening strategy. Parents almost never suggest it when they're discussing ways of showing interest, but they often notice it when they see you doing it. And some parents may notice it, others may miss it. But physical contact is another one, that when you're role-playing, you're almost always engaging in some kind of physical contact with kids. And sometimes that's not something that parents had suggested to you, but they'll pick up on it immediately and recognize it as important. So one parent saying, it's really important that you gave him a pat on the back, may be a really powerful influence on another dad sitting over here who may be less inclined to do that. So that's a really important point. Parents learn from each other in a group, and that's an opportunity to do that. Greg?
Do you ever help parents relax with identifying with some of the errors that they see? Do you ever touch on that at all, specifically?
Tell me a bit more about what you're talking about, Greg.
If they watch something and they're thinking to themselves, "Oh, I've done that," or "That's something that I do," and they begin wondering, or focusing
it's a
upon
good
that.
point. The tapes are kind of exaggerated, so if you were a parent looking at them, a lot of parents would probably, we imagine, think to themselves, I may be having difficulty, but I'm not as bad as that jerk on the tape. So they're a little bit exaggerated. It's easy for parents to distance. But parents often in groups will laugh and say, it sounds kind of familiar, or that tone of voice is something I hear myself saying. So parents can leave it out there to distance and say, it's something I would never do, and this is what that father needs to do. Or some of them who are a bit more reflective may recognize that they make an approximation to some of the errors themselves. But they can really deal with it, as they see fit as a parent. You can talk about a strategy, recommend a way of handling it better, generate the rationales for that, and you don't really have to say, that's the mistake that I make. But some reflective parents will, and the... No.
Yeah, I guess my question is sort of a follow-up to that. I know that in other studies of modeling, some people find that it's effective to do the coping model thing, and I'm wondering if it would be consistent with what you're trying to accomplish here, where you sort of think out loud about, hey, I find I'm getting real angry here. What strategies could I use in this situation that would be more productive? But I wonder if that wouldn't be imposing too much of yourself in the context of COPE. Because certainly other training programs, there's a lot more modeling from the instructor, if you will, about how to approach that problem. And coping modeling is a technique they use, in part to do what I think you're suggesting, Greg, which is sort of build in that, hey, I've been there too kind of thing. So what's your thought about that, John?
Well, the process of looking at errors on tape and generating solutions really is coping model. It's two ends of it, and I know some programs do insert some of the interim steps, but we want the parents to generate the strategies in this program. So the idea is for the parents to come up with a group with the solutions or the recommendations, and for the parents to think about what the rationales for those are. Use attributional models to think about.
Parents almost kind of spontaneously do that. Oh yeah, I do that, or I've done that.
I think so. Some do. I think some who are more reflective think that through, and I think others probably don't.
You mentioned earlier that the videos that show the right way to do something have not shown to be as effective as showing people errors and having people then process, looking for those and talking about those, coming up with their own ideas about how it could be better. Has there been a comparison between the more extreme, the exaggerated errors, as these is the one we saw, versus ones that are more typical, like the actual, more realistic, where you could actually see some good and some bad, but it would be somewhere in the middle, not perfect parenting, but not exaggerated errors?
The study that I showed you, the 1993 consulting and clinical study, is one of the only ones that I know that's actually looked at the effects of different approaches to modeling, and in that particular study, the impact with that was not on learning, but on the process and on attendance and on arriving late and on completing homework and on resistance in the session. Jerry Patterson did some studies where they coded interactions in parent training kinds of models. And in those studies, they showed that when leaders give advice or a directive, that the contingent probability of resistance goes up immediately. And they alternated those strategies back and forth. So there's a number of studies that point to the problem with giving direct advice, is that it often elicits reactance. And, all the way back to some BEMS models of reactance, we've been aware that sometimes pushing people to make sort of health changes or to do reasonable things elicits some pushback. So, but it'd be a great set of studies to do for a dissertation would be to explore different versions of modeling. There may well be those studies. I'm just not aware of them.
Does anyone else have any more questions?
Let's go ahead and we'll go into the next session. And I'm going to, again, walk you through this from the beginning, get you guys to play parents, and I'll play the role of a leader. And again, we won't do it in real time, so I'll get you started on activities and then we'll periodically pause for discussion. So let's begin this evening with a review of your homework. And could we ask in each of your subgroups, could you pick a subgroup leader who could take a few notes for the evening? So Lori, thanks. And this group? Okay, Allison, thank you. Here? Jackie, thank you. Here? Elaine? Great. Here? Soraya, thank you. Now, everybody take out your homework sheets from last week. Everybody got those? Great, you guys brought them back. Perfect, thank you. Good? Okay, yeah. See, you did a lot of stuff there, Greg. You've been busy. Okay. Here? Okay, good. Okay, so can somebody, I know there are a couple people who weren't here last week. Can somebody remind the group about the strategies that we were talking about last week? What were we working on? Okay, attending? What were some examples of ways of attending or showing interest that you were talking about last week? Okay, asking kids questions. I wonder what those guys are doing in that picture. Other examples? Okay, just watching kids, paying careful attention to what they're doing.
Participating in the activity.
Joining in, purchasing, coloring your own picture. Okay, making eye contact with kids. Getting down, showing interest, making eye contact, asking questions. What other things did you talk about? Ways of letting kids know you're showing interest or paying attention. Okay, praising things that they were actually doing. Did a great job with that. Yeah. Nice job on the math. You got those right. That was a difficult one. You thought that through. I'm proud of you for that kind of thing. Okay, what I'd like you to do in your groups is to each go around and very briefly, because we have a lot to get through tonight, I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to participate, but just about a minute each, give an example of a situation where you used attending strategies at your house and you thought you did a good job, thought you handled it well as a parent. Don't worry about how your kids responded because, again, change is going to take some time. So just one situation where you thought you used attending strategies and you thought you did a pretty good job. And if you hear a good example in your group, let people know about that. That's a nice way to handle that, Greg. Nice going. Okay, go ahead. Just another minute, we'll come back together as a large group. Okay, let's come back together as a large group. Let me get out of role here before we start. One of the things that you have to do as a leader is to manage the time, and you'll hear that oftentimes before I give you instructions, I encourage you to keep it really brief. One of the other jobs that you have as a leader is to manage the conversation. And in a large group, parents have a chance to chat with people. It's a nice time, they enjoy it, they like to talk. And yet, in order to make the group work and function, you really have to help people manage the conversation. And sometimes you have chatty subgroups that have a hard time kind of winding down their discussions. And so if you're coming back and you're deciding, well, let's start with this group, one of the things you can sometimes do is start with a chatty group, and they'll immediately stop talking. So as a leader, I'll try to give you some examples. You guys are an extremely well-behaved group, so I haven't had to do it much, but I'll try to give you some examples of conversational prompts for managing conversation. Because if these guys are reporting on an example of homework, and you know, it's maybe Kathy's had a real success this week, and she's really proud of it, and you know, Jackie's sharing it with the group, and I'm over here in a group, and we're chattering away and not paying any attention. What's going to happen to your group? You're really going to start to lose some of that engagement. You're going to lose some of the cohesion that's in a group, and these guys will resent it, and these guys will miss something that was happening. And so it's really incumbent on you as a leader to manage that conversation, and that sometimes you need to go shh, to get people to quiet down. Sometimes you need to wait before you start the next exercise. Sometimes you need to give a prompt like, let's go around and I'd like to hear from the subgroup leader, just the subgroup leader, just one person at a time, so that everyone can hear. And that's a prompt we often use when it's a noisy, chatty group. Because parents are enjoying themselves. A lot of parents will say, you know, this is the only time that I get out of the house by myself. This is the only time that I have with adults where I can sit for a couple of hours and talk about things. And so it's an important time for parents, and they love to chat away. But you as a leader are going to have to try to manage that. So listen to some of the strategies that I use. And some groups you really don't have to do that much. Others, you really have to work very hard with the group. If you have a chatty group, it's worth reminding them at the beginning of the session that, so that everyone can hear, because it's kind of a noisy room. Let me ask when we're talking that only one person at a time speaks. So you need to work with the group on that. They've never been in a group like this, so they really don't know what the rules are, and you have to try to help them understand that. It's much easier to get that under control early on in the program, in the first session or two. Once they get rolling, 2, 3, 4 sessions, and they're chatting away and having a great time, it's a lot harder to manage it. So it's easier. They're tuned into group rules. They're tuned into your expectations big time in the first couple of sessions. After a couple of sessions, you'll find that your influence as a leader begins to kind of fade. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the processes that take place in groups as groups start to feel more confident and feel some ownership of the process and start to want to speak out about things. So managing conversations is important. Okay, so let's go back to the homework review. Let's start with David's group here, or Lori's group. What was one example of a situation where somebody was practicing attending strategies in your group?
Well, one really great example of attending was when your grandson was playing with the Legos, you asked him about that. She asked him questions about it and showed interest, and then complimented because he was really doing a great job building, some really neat stuff. But then she also reminded him that, that there was going to be cleanup time soon, but that she would, and then she offered to help him so she would join and do it together with him next time. So
Okay.
those were all good combinations of attending.
because that's a really neat little building that you built there. And it's got a nice colored roof on it, and it's got a lot of structural integrity. Yeah, that's really cool. But you know, in a few minutes, we're going to need to put it away, but I'll help you do that. That kind of thing. This group, a different one? So I don't know what the scuba lesson things are, but really got involved and got interested in something that was important to her, it sounds like. What was the message that Dad was giving his daughter and taking the time to learn those signals and participate in something that was important to her? What was he really saying to her? He cares about her. It's important. This group, different example? Want to play along with me, Dad? That would be fun. I'd enjoy that a lot. This group, a different example?
The poor dog got fed without
Great. You fed the dog. I didn't even have to ask you tonight. That was terrific. Put a little sticker on your chart. This group?
Fiona was telling us that her son was playing with his car, rolling the car up and down, and she got down on the floor with him and started asking him where the car was going, where they were going, and all that. So she engaged him and that attending strategy, used the attending strategies with him.
Cool car. Wonder where those guys are going. That kind of thing. Okay. So summary modeling is just model some examples of attending, of rewards, of getting down at kids' eye level. And parents will remember your tone of voice. They'll remember different ways that you've said things. So rather than describing things back again, use summary modeling strategies. Okay. Yes?
What if the parents give an example that is not given in context? An example I can think of is, the son, the father who says, my son finally stood up to that bully and popped him in the mouth. And I let him know how proud he was, and I took him out for an ice cream. Something like that. That's a little extreme.
Yeah. Well, let me give you an example of one you hear a lot. When we're working on when-then strategies with parents, parents will often say something like, well, I told my son, if you don't get your homework done, you're not going on the internet tonight. And the way we would summary model that back would be to say, when you get your homework done, then you can go on the internet. It's just correct it a little bit, tune it up. And so oftentimes you can just adjust it. More extreme examples, you'd have to stop and think about that. Yes?
Can you give an example how you would, like you said, tune up that particular scenario of a father who says, my son got in a fight today with the bully who's been picking on him for the last 3 months, and I told him, good job, you finally got him back. Like, how would you remodel that to make it sound different for that father to maybe understand, I don't know if that was the right time to do attending? Like, I don't know, how would you say that?
That is probably one you not want to remodel, right? Yeah. And that's a kind of an extreme example that would be a little hard to tune up. A couple of options that you have as a leader in a situation is to say, we're talking about attending strategies here, right? And they're talking about a very complicated situation that you don't fully understand, and you really don't have time in a group like this to explore in enough depth to make a reasonable comment about it. You really have no idea what happened. And it's not appropriate to use the group's time to deal with the specific issues of a parent. There's a basic rule in group work that you act to protect the group. So you have to think about the larger needs of the group. Some things you could think about doing would be to say that that sounds like a situation that we may want to come back to in later sessions when we have some strategies that might be more helpful for that. For example, that would be an example of a strategy that might be helpful to use planning ahead with. It's the kind of thing you might sit down with kids and think about some alternate strategies and what the advantages and disadvantages of those might be and work those out. But I certainly you wouldn't have the time to deal with it here. So somehow you'd want to give them an indication that you know, that's probably not a good strategy for dealing with it. But it's hard because you really don't know what happened. So, and that is unusual in my experience, is that again, parents tend to be tuned in to the norms of the group. They're highly influenced by social desirability factors, and they tend to be a bit more reasoned than that. But you're going to get that kind of thing every once in a while. I'd say, you know, that's a strategy that we really probably not appropriate to deal with it with attending. Let's come back to that when we have some additional skills that might be more helpful. That's one thought. I don't know what I would do otherwise. Okay, so where are we at? Okay, let's go on to the next stage. I'm going to show you a little bit of segment of videotape. Ask you to identify some errors, go around and get subgroup leaders to summarize those, and then ask an attributional question.
Jacqueline, time for bed.
What happened? Talk about it in your subgroups and okay, let's come back together as a large group, and let's start with this group. What was one of the things that your group thought had gone wrong? And let me hear just from the subgroup leaders, just one person at a time. What was one of the things that went wrong here? So just really abrupt, no warning. People agree with that? Okay. This group? Anything else? Okay, so it was kind of a disrespectful thing. It was abrupt. There wasn't any warning. Kind of a disrespectful way of handling the situation. People agree with that? Okay, this group?
No transition, no ritual, aggressive, lack of respect.
Okay. What was this mother, what was the lesson she was teaching her daughter here? What was she actually teaching?
I've got something else to do, so can we get this over with quickly?
What you're doing isn't relevant or important. My agenda is more important. There's just no choice here. People agree with that? Okay. Go back to your groups and talk about how you would have done this differently. What would have been a better way to handle this situation? Okay, just a second, we'll come back together as a large group. Let's start with this group over here. Let me just get out of role. As a leader, if you've got multiple subgroups, which you typically will have in a COPE program, you don't always want to start with the same group, because as David pointed out earlier, if we always start over here, by the time we get around to his group, all the good ideas are gone. So you want to move around. So sometimes start on this side, sometimes start on that side. Sometimes you start with a chatty group if you're trying to manage the conversation in the group. Sometimes for difficult strategies that are sometimes hard for groups to think through, you may want to start with a group that has a good idea. So as a leader, there are a variety of reasons that you start. From the perspective of the group, it almost looks like it's kind of random. You just kind of pick a group, but you're really thinking it through. When you're first learning to run a program like this, it's going to take really all of your resources just to get the basic protocol. But as the running of the group becomes increasingly automatic, then you have time to think about some of these other process issues that are important. So let's start with this group. What was one of the suggestions that your group had?
Well, it was to treat the child with respect, the way we would want to be treated. We wouldn't want somebody to throw the book out of our hands. So we would go up to the child and let them know, in 5 minutes, you know, we need to put your book away. Please.
Okay.
We'll be going to bed. So.
Okay. So in 5 minutes, it's going to be time to finish up and get ready for bed. But try to be respectful in the way that you'd like to be treated as a person. People agree with that? Okay.
In one period class, I think they said, you wouldn't do it to a 16-year-old, don't do it to a 5-year-old.
Okay. All right. So treat even young kids in the way that you'd like to be treated as an adult. Lori, your group, other suggestions?
They said she could have had a more soothing tone of voice and then given more like a reminder that the child seemed to be engaging in an adaptive behavior,
Mhm.
so not wanting to cut them off, but instead just saying, are you almost finished? When you get to the end of the next page that you're reading, we're going to, you need to get ready for bed.
Okay, so watch the tone. So when you're finished this page, then it'll be time to get ready for bed. People agree with that? Tone of voice important here? Okay. Here, this group?
We talked about first just getting the child's attention. So approaching the child and making sure that they're attending to you first and then giving a transition time or instruction.
Okay. So maybe sitting down and kind of the way you would, making eye contact. And, you know, David, when you're finished with this page, it'll be time to get ready for bed. Something like that? Okay, tone of voice, eye contact, nice transitional warning. And we'd probably work through the other groups, but just in the sake of time, I'm gonna move on. But let me just say that oftentimes as a leader, my experience has been that, you know, you think you've really got the strategy and there's nothing you can add, but you didn't get a chance to hear from this group, so you say to this group, well, other strategies that your group would suggest? What would you guys suggest?
We would praise her for reading her book quietly, and we would ask her the book as we walk towards the bedroom.
Okay. So take some time to show interest in what she's doing, and it's great you've been reading this evening, and looks like an interesting story. So what you'll often find is that other group will add something that's important to it, more often than not. So you want to go around, give every group an opportunity to participate. Now, there are several other scenes in this particular video. I'm not going to take the time to go through all of them. The next scene is one where the parent does give a transitional warning, a nice transitional warning, and the child kind of argues, why do I have to go to bed? You know, I don't want to. And they get into a little bit of a back and forth, and finally the mom, you know, gives in and says, okay, and lets her keep reading. And so the group talks about that. And we were working on ignoring last session, so they'll talk a little bit about that and the difficulties that may be associated with that. So there are a couple of other segments. So most of the strategies that we build in these sessions have have multiple components, and we take a look at one kind of error and then a second kind of error, and in this case, a third kind of error. So, but I'm not going to go all the way through those. Actually, I'll go through the third one here. So let's just.
Morning, Mom.
Morning, Jacqueline.
Can I watch some TV?
Don't you think you should get ready for school first?
In a little while.
All right, just for a little bit, okay? Jacqueline, are you dressed and ready for school yet?
In a minute, Mom.
Well, you better hurry, okay? Jacqueline, are you dressed for school yet?
In a minute, Mom.
Well, the bus is here.
Tell them to wait.
Take a few minutes in your subgroups and talk about what happened here. Okay, just another minute, we'll come back together as a large group. Okay, so let's start with this group here. What was one of the things that your group thought had gone wrong here? Okay, so she's kind of in the kitchen, wasn't really paying much attention, and missed the opportunity to say she probably ought to get dressed first before. People agree with that? Okay. This group, different thought? Okay. So kind of mom just wasn't kind of tuned in and involved in the morning, and looked like there wasn't a lot of structure and routine in the morning. People agree with that? Okay. Here?
Mom needed to have some type of a system in place. If she was going to let her watch TV first, she needed to set a timer or explain to the daughter the time frame so the daughter knew what the time frame was for getting ready.
Okay. So again, no structure or expectations here. People agree? David, your group, Lori?
Just no limit setting, no follow-up when she gave the instruction. If she even gave the clear instruction, no follow-up to that to make sure that the child did.
Okay. So she wasn't really even clear about what she wanted the child to do. People agree? Didn't follow up on that? So go back to your subgroups and talk about how would you have done that differently? What would have been a better strategy as a parent in this situation? Okay, let's come back together as a large group. Let's start with this group here. What was one of the suggestions that your group had? Trust. Okay, so she needed to pay more attention, monitor what was going on here. People agree with that? Okay. This group here, different suggestion?
Maybe go in the same room with the child so that she sees, whether the kid started to get ready or not, or she just was sort of disengaged in the kitchen in a separate room, yelling it out across the house.
Okay, so she needs to monitor more carefully and probably be in the same room, check in on what's actually going on. People agree with that? She was just kind of, this is a critical transition time. She was off doing something else. Okay. This group? Different suggestion? Okay, so some kind of time way of making sure the daughter knew what time it was. People agree with that? Some kind of timing and structure to it. This group? Okay. So clear instructions. What would be an example of the kind of instruction you're thinking about? Okay. So when you're dressed and ready for school, then you can watch television, that kind of thing? Okay. People agree with that? I'm reaching here. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, my question is, I've sat in on a couple of sessions of COPE, and some of the parents have expressed the feeling that there are certain behaviors that are expected of every child, like getting ready on time or listening to adults. And some of them can be resistant to the concept that you have to tell them that not every kid does that. How would you communicate to a parent who might be less accepting of some of these concepts?
Any thoughts about how you might handle that as a group leader? Yeah?
I'd ask the rest of the group what their thoughts are on the process and if they've had experience with the same problem.
So one way is to say, have other people had that kind of thing happen around your house, and then ask what kinds of things people have found helpful. That's often a good strategy in a COPE group, is to ask how common this is. Let people have difficulty with this, and what kinds of things have people found helpful. Generally, you want to, as a COPE group leader, you're going to rely on the group to think through situations, to think about what the alternative strategies might be, to decide on what might be best. As a leader, you're typically not going to get into giving specific advice or suggestions. You try as best you can to use the group. I don't know if that answers your question. Okay, so where were we? All right, so you get the idea. Before we move on to modeling, any questions about that? I think it's late in the afternoon. This is one where parents typically come up with when-then strategies pretty quickly. We went around through 3 or 4 groups here looking for it. I had to kind of work it out of that group. But typically parents will make that kind of a suggestion fairly quickly. Okay. Okay, so we're going to do some modeling now, so I'll just walk you down through this. So this is a situation where parents are trying to get kids ready for school in the morning. Are there other situations where you could use when-then strategies? Okay, homework, getting your homework done. People agree with that, or reasonable? Okay, other situations that you might apply a when-then strategy to? Okay, getting your room cleaned up. Okay, eating the broccoli. Okay, all right. So, right, let's pick one of those situations. What would be an easy one to start with? Let's don't do the broccoli. So cleaning your room? Okay, so all right, I'm going to need somebody who can help me out with this, be a kid. Somebody willing to give me a hand? Somebody feel like in a cleaning mode? David, thanks. All right, so have a seat. So how old is David? 10? Okay. 10-year-olds expected to clean up their rooms? Okay, all right. So what day is it? When are we doing this? Saturday. Okay, so it's Saturday morning. Is that a reasonable time to expect 10-year-olds to clean their room? Okay. And what time would be a good time for me to get him to do this?
Please don't say that.
In the morning? Okay, all right.
You're really going to make this hard on me.
I want you to be a good kid today. Okay, so it's in the morning, and what's he probably doing right now? Watching TV? Okay, so he's doing something he wants to do. Maybe he's in bed sleeping, maybe he's watching TV, so we'll pretend like he's playing video games. So, what could I say first here? What's the first thing I should say? Okay, just spend some time interacting with them. All right. Then what?
Notice where he's in the middle of something, like, he's playing a game. Notice just where he's starting a new game, or it's ending, or he's in the middle of something.
Okay, so pay attention to the transition. See where he is in the middle of a game. Think about a transitional statement. People agree with that? Okay, and then what next?
I think it depends on how bad the
Okay.
I plan to make cupcakes.
I think we're going to need to come back that another session, David. All right, so
I think we would want to know if he had some breakfast yet before we put him to work.
okay. So one of the things I want to make sure is that he's had some breakfast. We'll assume it's 10 o'clock, that maybe we had breakfast a bit earlier in the morning. Okay, so he's had breakfast. He's playing his video games. I'm going to give him spend some time showing interest in what he's doing, see what level he's at, give him a bit of a transitional warning, and get to the next level. There'll be time to get your room cleaned up.
At 10 years old, in some households, it's already established that parents are coming to work. So just getting in the room, I think, is that you need to attend.
Okay, so to keep this simple, let's assume that he's out playing in the family room. But if that was a rule in my home, I'd have to respect that, I guess. Okay, so just keep it simple, and he's out in the family room playing his video game. So what else should I say to him? What should I say next? Okay, all right, so you get your room cleaned up, then you can come back and finish your game. All right, fair enough. Now, he's 10 years old. Is he going to argue with me? Okay, probably. So what should I do? Should I get into a big debate about this? A big battle? No? Okay. Just ignore it? Don't get into the argument? Okay, so let's give that a try. All right. Hey, cool.
Yeah.
Wow, you're at level 5.
Yep. I'm putting my my cupcake in the oven.
Awesome.
I have to set the baking time. I'm going to set it for 40 minutes, Dad. Ha!
Wow, how'd you know that?
Well, I've been playing this game for years, since I was 3.
That's cool.
My cupcake is done. Sweet.
Sweet, awesome. Okay, when you get to that next level where that next cupcake is done,
Yeah, I'm ready to take it out of the oven.
then it's going to be time to get your room cleaned up. And after you've gotten your room cleaned up, then you can come back to this. Okay.
Okay. I just took it out, Dad.
Okay, so I'm going to go off here. Not going to get into a big argument here. Where are you going, David?
I'm going to my room to clean up.
Awesome. So great. Looks like you got that the other round baked.
Yep.
So if you could, I'd appreciate if you get your room cleaned up.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and when you're done with that, and maybe I'll give you a bit of a hand because it is sort of a mess.
It's terrible.
You can come back and finish this up, okay?
Okay.
All right. Thanks, I appreciate that. Your mom's going to be so proud of us.
Excited.
Okay. All right, so let's get David a big hand. What did I do first? The first thing I did. Got down at his level. Then what did I do? I tried to show some interest in what he was doing here. Okay, got a sense of what level he was at and where he was in the game. Then what did I do? Okay, gave him kind of transitional warning. When you get to the next level, okay, then what? Okay, okay, so okay, when you get your room cleaned up, then you can come back to this. And I left the room kind of to avoid getting pulled into an argument because, you know, he can sort of push my buttons once in a while. And I came back, got him started. What did I do then? Okay, it's good. Offered him to give a little bit of a help. Yeah. Gave him some praise for doing that. Now, supposing around situations like that with David, I try to use that kind of a routine around the house. Show interest in what he's doing, try to use some transitional warnings, be a bit respectful of what he was doing, but was firm when then, didn't get into arguments, tried to avoid unnecessary conflicts. And I stuck to that over time, just tried to make that a routine way of managing situations. What would happen over time? You think he'd sort of start to get into a habit, do it kind of automatically? What do people think? Come routine? Would that happen immediately, like this week or next week? Supposing that I tried that once or twice with David and it sort of didn't work and I just gave it up. What's the lesson that I would have taught him then? People agree with that? Okay, so it's often helpful to get parents to think through both what the advantages are of using a strategy, but also the problems associated with giving in. Because oftentimes, parents are going to encounter some difficulty when they introduce a strategy, and they're going to think, well, this isn't working. What they usually mean is this isn't working immediately. A lot of parents have, again, very unrealistically short outcome expectations, and so we try to get them to think through what the long-term impact of using a strategy would be consistently over time, and the problems associated with trying something and giving in quickly, and trying something and giving in quickly, and some parents get themselves in a lot of difficulty with that kind of a routine. Okay, modeling. So we would go through the first situation and the second situation and the third situation.
When there are a house full of children and they are close in age and maybe in the same gender too, how do we, because parents tend to want to make a rule for everybody, it applies to everyone.
Yeah, general rule.
Yeah, because you have to, you're working, your husband's working also, you don't have time for this for every one of the children, 5 of them. 5 of the children, so the first 3, maybe we have to repeat. I don't know. How would you handle that? How would you advise the parent
As a COPE
If-
group leader,
Yeah.
a COPE group leader would typically say, how many of you have more than one kid? You know, and probably
Oh.
most parents would raise their hands.
Yeah.
And then if you have to do two things in a situation where a parent brings up a kind of a personal situation, is you have to decide, is this relevant to everyone in the group? Or is this such a critical issue for this parent now that you really need to deal with it, or you're going to lose them? So oftentimes parents will raise issues that are just generally good points of discussion, because if you decide to work on this, it's going to take about 5 minutes, let's say, minimum. And so you're going to lose 5 minutes that you're going to have to take somewhere else in the session. 5 minutes out of practice, 5 minutes out of brainstorming, 5 minutes out of homework planning. So in a tight session, you have to be very, very careful about getting into these issues. So one of the things that you can do is just say, you know, how many of you have more than one child? And is this something that you could do with more than one at a time? And get the group to think a little bit about that. And balanced attending is an example of a strategy where you're not thinking one kid at a time, you're thinking about, you know, you guys have really been helpful this evening. And you know, well, could you do the same thing with when-then strategies? Could you say, when you guys have all got your rooms cleaned up, then, so, and that would be one way of dealing it. But as a leader in a group where you're trying to teach basic skills, you don't have the time to deal with complexities. And parents will often confront you with something that's well beyond the stage of the program that you're at, and you have to think carefully about being drawn into that. If it's an important issue that's generally relevant for parents, then it's probably worth taking the time. If a parent says, you know, I tried that and it didn't work, that's a really useful opportunity oftentimes to work on motivating parents and setting expectations. So you just have to kind of think about it as a leader. There's always trade-offs in running a group between the needs of individual parents and the needs educationally of a large group. It's just like a teacher in a classroom, and you've got 30 kids, and you have kids who have individual needs that you need to pay attention to, but at the same time you have to keep the class moving along at a certain pace. So it's always a challenge as a leader. Because that's a really interesting issue, and for a lot of parents, that would be something worth taking the time to talk about.
I was going to ask Chuck, what percentage of the time is it the case that you recommend to someone who's participating in the group that they perhaps see somebody individually, or is it ever the case that they're doing kind of some, I guess simultaneously might be a little bit much in terms of time constraints, but how often do they go on to get some individual work after COPE?
I would say probably half of the parents who are in COPE have come to COPE from something else. Maybe they were in family therapy and they decided that working on parenting skills would be an important next step, and so they're going to run through the program and then they're going to get back together. Or people have finished up a round of an intervention, and people have said, one of the things I'd like you to do to keep working on this, so maybe people will say, first thing I'd like you to do is to work on a parenting program, and then we'll get together and see where things are at. So, yeah.
I kind of feel like if that happened a lot with a particular person, I wouldn't want to put them off.
No,
but I
no.
might say to them after
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
group or it's
Yeah.
a break, you know, it really sounds like you've got some real challenging
Yeah,
problems
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Have you ever thought about pursuing that with somebody?
You think of other options. Yeah, yeah. One of the things we run in our community are a whole series of one-session COPE workshops, and we do one on, it's called Coping with Homework, and we do one on coping with bedtime and coping with sibling conflict, where we beef up the skills that parents have. And those are often, parents often have problems with a lot of fighting and arguing and conflict in kids, and we actually teach the mediation strategies, the same mediation strategies that we use in our school-based peer mediation programs for parents. And those are really helpful in teaching kids strategies for resolving conflict. And bedtime is often a big problem, and coping with bedtime is a set of strategies that parents often like to work on at the beginning of the school year when trying to get kids back into a schedule. So if there are problems that you hear coming up oftentimes in COPE groups, those supplementary kinds of programs can allow parents to do one of two things. One, to to start out taking a one-session workshop on something that seems relevant and finding out this is really helpful, and they like the idea of working in your group. And I'm going to have to stop. Or adding that on the end, parents say, you know, I really don't want this to end. You know, it's really helpful to keep seeing people, and well, here are some additional booster kinds of workshops that you can take to beef up your skills, to strengthen them, to expand your repertoire. So there are ways that you can deal with it. Yeah.